Hey everybody, and welcome to Threat X3 Productions. I am Nick, and today we're going to be doing another It's Free, so why the hell not? Or IFS WTHN is a show where we're taking the top 50 free-to-play games on the PlayStation Network, and we are giving them arbitrary scores and eventually ranking them from 1 to 50. So from the best to the worst. We're going to do it one game at a time, and we're just going to try to have as much fun as we can with this series. So please enjoy. All right, time to figure out what our very first game is. Oh, good. The game I have no idea what it is. This ought to be fun.
No. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No. 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 Hell no. 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 I refuse. No. No.
Alright, Let It Die is possibly one of the weirdest games I have personally played. So before you go to the comments, I said one of the and personally. So I don't need like 800 people mouthing off in the comments about how Deadly Premonition is way weirder. And considering that this is just a free-to-play game, this plays maybe not like a AAA game, but at least a discounted game. And I'm not even saying that in a bad way. The challenge is great. The mechanics are enough like a Souls-like game that those people would feel at home, but it adds enough to keep it unique. So, before we get into this, let's get to know a little bit more about Let It Die. So Let It Die was released on PlayStation 4 on December 6, 2016, and later on PC on September 26, 2018. It currently has a 72 on Metacritic and a 75 on OpenCritic, with the Steam version receiving mostly positive reviews. So as far as reception, it seems like it has a pretty good reception. So what is it exactly? Well, it is a Souls-like action RPG set in a Mad Max / heavy metal post-apocalyptic world. So while Dark Souls has you swinging around swords and shooting arrows, and the Surge has you in an exosuit and using makeshift weapons, this game is probably closer to the Surge games, with its weapons also seeming mostly makeshift, but with a selection of firearms as well. And everything has this Mad Max style of coat of paint on it. So let's start with the visuals. So outside of the Mad Max heavy metal coat of paint that soaks every inch of this game. We have the visuals, and they're sort of cartoony with a hint of cell shading all over. The character models look fine with not a ton of detail. The weapons look great, and all the clothing has a weight to them, making them look like actual items in the world and not just something that's placed on your character. The enemies mainly steal the show, with so many of them creatively gruesome and grotesque in so many ways. A lot of the regular enemies seem like just variations of you with different armor and different weapons, so they don't really bring that much surprise to the table, but the unique enemies like bosses and mini bosses will always have you cringing at their gross features. Sound. The sound is great. Slashes, clashes, and bashes all sound weighty and feel great to pull off some of the cooler moves. The overall sound design from the ambiance is great too. Like I said, this is a very metal game, so I feel they did a good job of not feeling like you're a tourist in the metal world, but that you live the metal world. It's hard to describe exactly what I mean, other than to say that if you lived in a world described by a rock legend, this would certainly be the way a blind person would see the world.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Alrighty, let's get to the gameplay. I've recently been playing Elden Ring, and I had to physically pull myself away from that game in order to start this series. So that is fresh in my mind. So this game getting chosen on the randomizer could be a blessing or a curse with that in mind. And honestly, the gameplay itself is solid. This feels like a game you would normally spend money on. And to be clear, for a free-to-play game, that's actually a high praise, because there are plenty of games that you would say, well, yeah, this feels like a free-to-play game, and then you still have to pay money for it. You know the ones that have the most basic features at launch and also just happen to have a giant cosmetic store. Sure, these games are really good a year after they launch, but only after presumably getting money from a bunch of whales. All that to say that this feels like a game that you could pay money for, but you don't have to. The combat feels responsive, and just like any of the other Souls-like games that are out there, it's all about learning the different moves and exploiting openings. Each weapon or your fist has two moves, light and heavy, but at first you only have access to the light attacks. Only by using and killing other enemies with each weapon will you start to unlock more damage with it and more moves with it. There's also a rage meter, and every weapon has a special move that can be performed with the rage meter. Some cost a little bit more and others cost a little bit less, but they are always so fun to pull off. Just by doing normal damage or even having damage done to you, you gain rage slowly. But you can also just smash a rat and eat the mushroom that grows from its dead body to gain one level of rage. If that last sentence had you going, wait, what? That is not the half of it. One of the most intriguing things about this game is all the hidden mechanics. Like, one time I was streaming the game and somebody in the chat mentioned I should try cooking my mushrooms, and I genuinely had no idea what they were talking about. But lo and behold, I held up something near a fire and it said that I could cook it. This generally makes the effects better. Like, for instance, if you have something that gives you a status and it lasts 30 seconds, when you cook it, it will last 40 seconds. All of these little secrets are not told to you by the game. Instead, these are just things that you kind of just have to find out by playing the game, or by having somebody helpful in the chat. I would say my biggest negative for the combat is just how limited it is. I'd hate to compare it because it isn't necessarily fair. However, Elden Ring gives you a perfect example of a really good moveset. Out of all of the 100+ weapons that you can wield in Elden Ring, every single one of them has the following: light standing, heavy standing, heavy charge, light sprinting, light after a dodge roll, heavy after a guard, heavy jump. And that's not counting the combos. Some light attacks have up to 5 or more moves in a combo, and most heavies have at least a follow-up move, if not a couple more. Then you add Ashes of War on top of that. These are basically customizable, and you can put whatever you want on most weapons, but most weapons already come with an Ashes of War already equipped. Now let's talk about Let It Die and its moveset. Keep in mind that a lot of these you have to unlock by using the weapon more, so these aren't even the ones that you get with the weapon at its starting point. Okay, ready? Light attack, the only one that you can do with the start of the weapon. Heavy attack, rage attack, stunned, finisher. And that's it. I had to include stun finisher, even though I didn't include that in Elden Ring, just to bolster its numbers. And in Let It Die, heavy attacks don't even have a follow-up or combos. At first I thought this was just a coincidence, but I tried it on several different weapons and none of them have anything more after the initial heavy attack, other than just repeating that heavy attack. So all of that to say that the moveset is just massively smaller than any other Souls-like game out there. I would say that this is the part of the game that feels free to play. The combat is great, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't have that much depth. I would say overall this doesn't ruin the experience, but it's rather something that you can definitely notice after a while. Then we have the bosses. Visually, they are all very distinct and gruesome and completely unique from one another, but mechanically they can feel a bit samey and some even just repeating. Be that as it may, the challenge is definitely there, and it finds a great balance between challenge and fairness. Just like any Souls-like game, you should never die because the game is being unfair, but rather because there is something that you can learn from and try again. In most boss battles, this is true. There is one boss that I can't quite figure out how to beat other than just to bum rush it, but this is one out of so many, so it doesn't seem like a repeatable problem. One of the most unique mechanics in this is the characters. You can actually play as more than one. At first, the character you can choose is just a generic all-arounder, but later you can unlock characters with specialties. So let me explain. Here is the all-arounder that you get from the very beginning. As you can see, you can only level up each stat by 5, with a starting of 200 HP, 260 stamina, and 10 for strength, dexterity, and vitality. Then as you progress through the game and you pass certain milestones, you will unlock higher tiers of characters. So let's take a look at the same class, all-arounder, but a 3-star. Now I can level everything up to at least 13 or more with 400 HP, 234 stamina, 30 strength, 30 dexterity, 16 vitality, and 12 luck. So even at level 1, this is a better character than you started off with. Now let's take a look at a specialty character. Here is a striker. They specialize in melee combat and in HP and strength with 500 HP, 216 stamina, 50 strength, 16 for dexterity and vitality, and 12 for luck. And these characters help you build out your roster. You can then send inactive character on expeditions, and attack another player. And if you are victorious, then you get a pretty decent payday. You can also set them up to defend your own waiting room from invading enemies, deciding where they will stand and what they will have equipped. I'd say the main negative about defending is you don't really get to participate. Instead, it just happens. Typically, you're on a dungeon run or you logged off the game when this happens, and then you come back and everything's destroyed. This can be really frustrating coming back to your waiting room and it just being attacked. I wish there was some way of getting a notification and getting the option to defend it yourself. You can buy alarms which will make the invaders fight NPC enemies, and luckily this is attached to a currency that doesn't have real world money equivalents, but still doing it yourself would be so much better. Speaking of invading someone's waiting room, you can do it too. First things first, you can choose your home state as your home base and essentially fight other states to see who is dominant. So huge plus that I can choose to be my home state Idaho and go kick some Cali ass. So basically you get off the train, you attack some characters in the waiting room, and then you attack their banks, and this will give you a payday. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll fight someone who doesn't really have their defense set up, and sometimes you'll get one-shotted by a guy who actually knows how to set his shit up. The difference between how fun this could be and how ridiculously easy is completely random. Even choosing someone with a relatively same rank as me was questionable. He only had one person to defend and I took them out with no problem. They didn't have any armor or any weapons attached to them. Ideally, you would choose someone near your rank and they would have an interesting setup. And it is a gauntlet just to get to the waiting room. With so many easy attacks in a row, it can get old really fast. And there really isn't any way to distinguish who has a good setup and who doesn't. Other than their rank, there is just no way to know what to expect. The only way I could seem to get somewhat of a challenge was by selecting somebody who had attacked me, but the majority of those people are a way higher rank than me, and so I could most likely run into a situation where I have no chance of winning. But with some grind, I could really see this being something fun to do, at least on the side. Especially if you're waiting for something to finish in R&D. Speaking of R&D, the game also has a very robust crafting and upgrading system. It has its positives and its negatives, but I would say that the overall experience is mostly positive. So you find crafting materials throughout the levels or dropped by enemies. You have to survive long enough to get them back to the waiting room, because if you die, you lose everything, even the character you're playing as. When you upgrade an item, it takes real world time to finish. But luckily it hasn't gotten ridiculous the amount of time that it's doing. Like, I haven't come across 48 hours just to upgrade a machete. Of course, I'm not really far into the game, so who knows, maybe it definitely gets there. With the crafting system, this can actually make for a really interesting gameplay loop. Go on a dungeon run to get some crafting materials, make it back to your waiting room, R&D a weapon or a piece of armor. While you wait, attack someone's waiting room for extra cash and blue stuff, come back to receive the R&D equipment, go back to the dungeon and start it all over again. But then we come to the monetization side of the free-to-play equation. Is it a good system where it's only cosmetics, or is it a horrible system with paid advantages? Unfortunately, it's the latter, and it is extremely pay to win. Now, if you want to customize your waiting room, great. Make it look the way you want, no problem. But then you can go and straight up buy crafting material in order to upgrade your equipment. Here is a perfect example. Here is a chest piece. It has a defense of 219. The next step up would bump it all the way up to 893 defense. So this is 674 more protection points. That would be totally reasonable if the only way that you could get this is by playing the game, right? Well, take a quick trip to this machine and there is a daily selection and it has the craft items that I need. But hey, I guess at least if you'd have to come back on the right day, right? You already know where this is going. Now, this is called a daily rotating item pool, but really it seems to have every craft item in the game. And wouldn't you know, I need real money currency skulls to buy them. So that armor, I needed 2 war and symbol red metal. Now, surely I could just buy the amount that I need, right? Wait, you mean as to be expected, they purposely price things in a way so that you have to buy more and will always have leftovers? Oh, that's great. Now, maybe you could argue that if this was a PvE game, that it doesn't really matter. You're just affecting your own game, right? But this does have some PvP elements. Remember, I mentioned before you could send your inactive characters on expeditions. This means essentially invading someone's game with an NPC of your character. And with a nice 893 defense points, this makes a really tough character to deal with. Add on top of this that you can specifically target lower stat people, and you can even see what they have equipped before sending them out. At least with attacking someone's waiting room, there is an air of chance. Sure, they might be the same rank as you, but you don't know what any of their characters have equipped with armor or with weapons. Or they could just have a really bad setup or a really good setup. But having the ability to straight up grief someone, specifically targeting them because they're weaker with equipment that you just threw money at, is a decision I just don't understand why developers were okay making. The last thing I'll say about the gameplay is the fact that it's single player. With the ability to join a team and that team being your own home state, it just seems like a huge missed opportunity to be able to team up with somebody. Even if it's just co-op specific or in multiplayer specific modes, it just would have been nice to have something. But once again, this is not something that will ruin the experience, just something that I definitely wish would happen. In summation, Let It Die is a wonderful action RPG with enough familiar to satisfy Souls-like players, but with enough to make it stand apart and make it unique, like the addition of multiple characters, the ability to invade people's world both while you're in control and while inactive. The game is solid and would certainly satisfy anyone who is a fan of action RPGs, but its lack of depth will most likely weigh on you more and more as you play the game. It's tons of fun, blood, and gore. I think it's a good game that anybody should feel good at least trying, because hey, it's free, so why the hell not? Now this is the part of the video where I rank the game. I have a couple of scores that I will give the game based on some parameters that I have set up for every game. At the end, I will place it on a rank from 1 to 50. Where it ends up on the rank isn't necessarily based on the score, but where I personally feel it deserves to be. And since this is the first game, it can and probably will change as time goes on. So on a scale from 1 to 10, these are the things that I will be scoring it on. Visuals, gameplay, fun factor, monetization. Visuals, I will definitely give this an 8. They don't look great and maybe even dated, but I won't score it any lower because I do believe some of this is on purpose with its cartoony look and cel shading. Gameplay, I will be giving this a 7. As I stated before, the lack of depth in the combat itself is not great, so it's a bit lower. However, the overall fun of the game does bring it up a little bit, so I feel like 7 is the perfect place. Fun factor, I feel like the fun factor is a very give and take. The give is the dungeon crawling side of things, its challenge, and its overall variety of combat. Its negative being the implementation of invading somebody's world and how random it can feel. So I think this brings it down to at least a 7 as well. Monetization is easy. Any game that will let you pay for an advantage that also has any sort of player versus player, even if it's not directly controlling the player, will automatically get a very low score. And considering that there is actually very few cosmetics that you can buy, and the majority of what you can buy is catered towards giving you some sort of advantage, this is 100% a pay-to-win game. So in monetization, it gets a 2. So now let's put it on the rank from 1 to 50. In total right now we have 54 games on our list. If you want to see how I eliminated some of them, you can check this video out. So where is this one going to land? Since this is our first game, I'm not sure where it will end up at the end, but I think it can at least start at the top 10. So I'm going to put it at 10 and we'll see where it goes from there. All right, on to our next game, which is Space Lords. All right, so thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of It's Free, so why the hell not? Make sure to come back and check out each game, figure out where it lands on my top 50 of free-to-play games. Anytime there's going to be like a new free-to-play game, I will probably add it in, but don't expect it to be added in the week it comes out. It might take a couple of weeks for me to fit it into the schedule, and more importantly, play enough of it to make sure that I have a really good handle on everything. So thank you guys so much for joining me on Threat X3 Production. I was Nick, and you have yourself a good day.